On the question of human immortality, two mutually exclusive alternatives are usually raised. The first can be called the Platonic position, a dualism in which the soul, which, as opposed to the body, must be understood as a person's essence, belongs among the eternal ideas and can only reach its destination by being freed from the body that defiles it in the shadow world of becoming. That which seemingly robs life of meaning, the decay of the body and the faculties of the mind, death, the world's flight from the person, is from this perspective understood as liberating, and annihilation is meaningful to the extent that it bears witness to the freedom that awaits. The second alternative can be called the naturalistic position, a materialistic monism in which soul, or mind, is of the same element as the body and the former decays in tandem with the latter. Questions of immortality here makes little sense. Reality consists of living processes and non-living objects. When the body is no longer a living process, it is a non-living object. Life continues after a particular expression of it has died, but this is of little comfort for the particular life that strives to maintain itself. But is this striving itself singular to that particular life? Or is the drive for self-preservation identical in all living beings? Is it life itself that wills in both me and in the fly dying on my windowsill? And if so, what comfort is there for the eternity that longs within me? The Platonic position privileges the immaterial, while the naturalistic privileges the material. Christianity unites them. Neither Arianic idolatry nor Luciferian flight, but divinized matter and a material God. God elevates matter, including us, by becoming material. Such an idea stands in clear relief to the naturalistic position with regard to human flourishing. From a naturalistic perspective, improvement is normative for action and attitude. Human faculties are to be stretched to their utmost. But to what extent this actually occurs depends on factors unevenly distributed by nature and class determined by society. The possibilities for reaching natural human fulfillment are thus conditioned by injustice. Further, fulfillment inevitably ends in death. A person who has gathered his or her spiritual powers in a mighty effort capable of beholding the Absolute in all its glory only melancholizes the divine. A small glimpse of the eternal merely reveals the primacy of the perishable. From a theistic perspective, all are created in the image of God, regardless of status and abilities. And fulfillment, the kingdom, is open to all. Salvation, or fulfillment, from this perspective is tied to the human relation to the eternal, that which makes any relation possible. Not a self-created feat, an event, but orientation, an orientation toward that which makes all orientation possible. The meaning of finite life is to participate in eternal life through synergy. The two most common alternatives regarding life after death in the collective consciousness are either a bodiless soul, whether understood as pure mental states or as a kind of ball of light, or a reanimated body reassembled from its dead state. The Pauline perspective, however, proposes a transformation of the biological body into a spiritual body. This corresponds to the two words for life in Greek, bios and zoe, the former being what we understood as natural, metabolic, self-maintaining life, which biology can study, while the latter is a term John uses of Jesus Christ, which sneaks in at the end of life when one asks, "Have I lived?" The Christian life after death is not a biological life retrieved in eternity, but Aufhebung, in the Hegelian sense, in which one participates in one's own life by losing it. I preserve myself in something I no longer am. Cross and resurrection are mutually implicating. Through his life and death, God the Father, through God the Son, reveals himself as love. And given that humanity is created in God's image, humanity's innermost meaning is revealed as a life of love. And love can be nothing other than self-emptying. It creates by withdrawing, fills by emptying itself. A common objection to a theistic understanding of reality is that the idea of God as a transcendental standard diminishes human autonomy. By subordinating itself to a goal and meaning it has not set itself, the human being becomes alienated. Alternatively, one might think that humans project their own goals and inner meaning onto an external power. Yet the result is still alienation, instead of being self-legislating, where will and understanding are forged together. Humans submit to the will of another. Instead of arriving at the ground for action in their own searching conscience and understanding, humans act because God says so. This way of thinking about God finds its political analogy in the libertarian who opposes the state at all costs because the state is a priori perceived as external to individual self-expression. But does it make sense to think of God as external to humanity's innermost meaning? In John, Jesus identifies himself with God in the same movement as he is loved by God, and at the same time he himself loves God. Love and submission thus becomes united. Thomas Aquinas understands love as consisting of two intertwined desires: the desire for the good of the beloved and the desire for union with the beloved. Eleanor Stump extends this thought by emphasizing that union with another requires personal presence and mutual closeness, which again implies mutual openness, where the parties are able to stand before each other naked without hiding anything of themselves. In other words, they cannot be divided within themselves or before each other. A division possible only for someone who, with their whole soul, desires the good. And this desire for the good must be mutual in both parties, so that they together rest in the good. From this understanding, it follows that humanity's subordination to God does not negate its self-determination and autonomy, since what a human being desires in God is its own goodness and fulfillment as created in God's image. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. How does this relate to the eternal Aufhebung life? And how does the idea of eternal Aufhebung life relate to the experience of meaning? For many, possibly most in the West, the thought of the transience of all phenomena leaves a feeling of meaninglessness. This is because becoming in the Western metaphysical tradition has been subordinated to being. This is an asymmetrical division that does no justice to becoming. Either something is eternal or it is not at all. A mayfly and the oldest person in history both equally fall short before eternity. God's death is also the death of eternity. And because the Western person has long been accustomed to measuring value by the eternal, it is inevitable that the idea of the eternal's disappearance leaves what remains, becoming, without much value. The Western person thus falls into nihilism. A mental solution to this problem might be to unite becoming and being. In other words, to make God in the process and sanctify time in thought. But something in me resists this solution, and what resists it in me is myself. In other words, it is not enough for me to annihilate myself into time. I must be Aufhebung from it. And a critique of the entire Western religious tradition could of course be this lack of submission to time. Why not strive for a total de-identification instead of dying for a new identity? One could imagine a kind of middle position by linking eternity and meaning to God himself. All our actions become eternalized in God's eternal presence. Thus everything we do gains infinite significance. But this significance does not benefit ourselves, we who strive for eternal love, but only God, as if we were merely raw materials for God's feast. It is not enough that our actions are eternally significant for God alone, and such a view of God alone breaks precisely with the idea of God as love, of God as Trinity, a community of love rather than narcissistic self-consumption. God cannot be thought of as anything other than a creator who has created to unite the created with himself, and this union reaches its height, so far as we know, in the human desire to love and be loved by God. But since what we desire is eternal, the answer to the desire must also be an eternal union with the desired, and this union must be known, felt, understood. A gift that is given must be given on.